Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to be here with you to talk about the South Acton Vision and Action Plan. First, I want to just introduce the project team. We're joined by the Town of Acton staff who we've been partnering with, Kristen Guichard, Kayla Sauer, and Nora Masler. The advisory group has been a key part of this process. As with each planning project, it's essential to have representation from board and committee members on an advisory group that can help guide the staff and move the process forward. And so the members of the advisory group, some of whom are with us tonight, are Select Board member Fran Arsenal, Finance Committee member Adam Nold, Acton Community Housing Corporation members Janet Adachi and Bob Van Meter, Economic Development Committee member Catherine Usoff, Planning Board member John Capetta, and Design Review Board and Historic District Commission member David Hahn. And then my name is Emma Battaglia. I am the project manager for this effort, and I'm a senior housing and land use planner at MAPC. John Cruz, Naji Nunnally, Casey Williams, and Andrea Harris-Long are members of the project team, and Casey and Andrea are here to help out with the webinar tonight. On our agenda is to give you a bit of a background on what we've been up to so far and why we're doing this process. We will talk about our draft vision for South Acton Village that has really come out of the engagement process that we've had so far. We will give some basics on what Section 3A is, also known as the MBTA Communities Requirement. We will talk about how Acton can comply with Section 3A. We'll go into some next steps, and then we will have opportunity for questions and answers. So just to give you some guidance for any questions you have, we recommend that you put them in the question and answer box. If things are straightforward, we will do our best to answer while the presentation is going on. Anything that's more complicated, we might hold for the end for the Q&A portion. But any questions that we answer during the presentation, we will also repeat that once we get to the Q&A. So we will do our best to capture everything. And if for whatever reason we don't get to finish, we don't get to every question, we will still provide answers and make that available after the meeting. I'm going to hand it over to Kristen to just give us a little bit of project background.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. And I just wanted to thank everybody first for being here tonight. I think the public process is probably, and public engagement is probably one of the most things that we enjoy out of the planning staff. So we're excited to be here tonight. And you know, many of you may be aware that the last South Acton Village Plan was adopted in 1995. And that's quite a long time ago now. And you know, the town's master plan, Acton 2020, the select board goals, and other documents that the plan has been working on, town has been working on, direct the town to create an updated South Acton plan. And so this is long overdue. So we're excited to get going on this. And at the same time, the state recently adopted new regulations that requires communities like Acton to adopt new zoning to allow for multifamily homes in our regulations as an option for development, and to require a portion of that zoning to be within a half-mile radius of the MBTA station, which for Acton is in South Acton. So the planning staff sought grant funds to hire MAPC to assist with this engagement process to update the South Acton Village Plan and see how Acton can comply with these new regulations within the same project. So that's why we're talking about both of them together. And then Emma, if you want to move to the next slide about our timeline, that would be great. Thank you so much. So we kicked off this project in the summer of 2022. We started off with community engagement opportunities, as well as a great website that MAPC was able to put together for us to keep the community informed. And we followed that by also collecting existing conditions, information, and analysis. And now we are starting to refine the community vision for South Acton Village based on that feedback. making sure that we got it right and hearing from the community. And then starting to explore ways that the town can comply with Section 3A and to allow for multifamily homes. And we can skip to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the community engagement aspect of this project is the most important. And like I said, I think probably one of the parts that we enjoy most putting together. We kicked off the project again with a townwide survey. It was sent to all USPS listed residential mailing addresses. We really wanted to make sure that we were not just sending these postcards to owners, but to renters and anyone else that is living at a residential address in Acton. We got over 900 responses, which was great. We followed that up with in-person engagement opportunities for those that did not have comfortability or access to a computer for that survey. And we had 3 days where we held that. We also collected some more anecdotal feedback as well. And then we conducted some individual focus group meetings with South Acton residents, town staff, and local developers to understand what their perspectives were. And MAPC continued to assist us with some digital communications as well to get information out about Section 3A, which is a complicated law. There's a lot to learn there. And so they've really been able to assist us with that. For the next slide, Emma, there's a great kind of compilation of pictures from people that were able to attend the in-person event. Thank you for everyone that was able to come. It was nice getting to hear from you. You may find yourself in some of these pictures here. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Emma to talk about the vision that we're starting to pull together based on the information we received from you.
Thanks, Kristen. So just to give some context about the area that we're talking about, so we are including, we're thinking about all the area that's in the South Acton Village District, which is a zoning district. That's the area that's here in pink. You see there's some overlap, but some additional parcels that are in the historic district. There are some, attractions and destinations that are there, like the Discovery Museum, historic features like Exchange Hall and Faulkner Homestead, lots of recreation opportunities like Jones Playground, farms, Stonefield Farm to be one of them. And so this just gives you a little context about the area we are talking about when we are specifically referring to South Acton Village. One of the questions that we asked on the community survey was for people to imagine their ideal version of South Acton in the future and to choose 5 words that could describe that future. And here it shows some of the words that emerged and that, these are words that you'll hear reflected in our vision that, really stood out, like walkable, community, safe, friendly, accessible, historic, and diverse. And we also asked some specific questions about the kind of uses that people would want to see in South Acton. And here, this just shows the breakdown. People could select whichever uses that they wanted to include. And you can see that there is, by far the most demand for retail shops and restaurants, followed by art galleries and creative spaces. We also asked about housing types and styles that people feel like they think would fit in the South Acton Village District. And what we heard was that single family homes, make the most sense in terms of the context of the area, but there are also opportunities where it might make sense to include cottage style housing where you have small single family or duplex kind of style housing that's clustered together and surrounded by open space. Also, people interested in seeing more townhomes and mixed use buildings, generally where commercial would be on the first floor. And this just shows you a little breakdown of the commercial uses that are currently in South Acton Village. And so we're trying to really think about how what's currently there aligns with what people want to see and how we can encourage those sort of things moving forward. And so there's really only one retail opportunity that people love, Erickson's Grain Mill. There aren't any restaurants. There are 2 historic nonprofits. There's 5 commercial recreation facilities. there's 2 service-related businesses, and there's about 2 offices. And that's pretty much the extent of the commercial activity that's happening in South Acton Village today. So based on everything that we heard from the public process, from the survey, from the focus group meetings, from the open houses, we have come up with the following vision. And this is meant to be really broad and to capture our aspirations for the area moving into the future. So what we have is, in the future, South Acton Village is a thriving transit-oriented neighborhood that is welcoming to people of all ages and income levels. The Village Center has retained its historic small-town charm while expanding its diversity of housing and business offerings. With its convenient commuter rail access and location as a connector village between Kelly's Corner, West Acton, and downtown Maynard, South Acton draws in visitors to shop, dine, and admire the many historic features and visit recreational facilities such as the Assabet River Trail and Great Hill. It is safe and easy to travel within South Acton and from South Acton to other parts of town, no matter the mode of transportation. And then we have provided a further breakdown based on each of these series of aspirations, and we will make the full vision statement available after this meeting because it's a little bit too long to just read out loud to you all now, but each of these different aspirations is captured in a bit more detail in that document, which we will share. So these aspirations basically provide greater detail about our vision for the future, and they include diverse housing options for all ages and income levels, enhanced pedestrian and bike connectivity, improved traffic safety and calming, vibrant commercial uses, strengthen historic assets, high quality, sustainable development, adequate infrastructure to support new development, and investment in public spaces. So now we have our first poll question. So you'll see, I'll have a slide that has the poll question, and then the next slide will give directions for how you can reply to this question, and we'll also track the responses. So our first question is asking if this draft vision statement adequately reflects your priorities for South Acton Village. And so on the next slide, you can see that you can respond to this poll in a couple ways. So you can either go to pollev.com/MAPC poll, and you can do that either in another window on your computer, or if you don't want to open up another window and you have a smartphone, you could do it on that. If you don't have either, you can text your response to 22333. You'll text MAPC poll, and then depending on what your answer is, you will give 1, 2, or 3, and each of those numbers corresponds with the answer. So Casey, if you want to start the first question, and then folks can start filling it out. You could see that it's just going to automatically populate with whatever votes come in. Going to give it another 30 seconds or so. Okay. So as you can see, mostly people feel like it reflects their priorities. About 3/4 of folks and another 18% think it somewhat reflects their priorities, and about 6% feels like it doesn't reflect their priorities. And we'll have a few more of these polling questions. We have one coming up right now. Okay. Casey, can you deactivate that question? Oh my gosh. It's not letting me go to the next page. Sorry about this. Clearly it's a little overwhelming for my computer. Okay, so. Okay, just gonna reload that.
And Emma, there is a hand raised right now. Are we going to wait until after the poll to answer verbal questions, or what would you like to do?
So if the question is specifically about the polling, I think let us know if you're having issues, and then someone would say, can we copy and paste the vision statement, the full thing? Sure. Kristen, do you or can one of you guys paste the full thing? Okay, I'm just gonna.
It also seems like there was an issue, at least just received a message from someone. It says that pressing 1 like only worked after you joined a presenter session. And seeing in the comments that a couple of people had that issue too. I don't know if you've experienced that before, or have any advice, or if it even went through.
Is that if they were texting?
Yes.
Okay.
It was if they were texting.
It was if they were texting?
Yeah, at least this one.
Okay, well, I think I'm not sure what the issue is. I think if right now, if you want to just keep track of your answers and you could email them to one of us after, we will make sure that we keep a record of them, because we want to make sure that we have all of that. Okay, hopefully this next question works. This is a short answer question. So we're asking folks, what should we add, remove, or change about this vision statement?
And we also have a few questions about how many people are participating in the poll.
Oh, sure.
So if you can maybe call that out as we get a mass of answers.
Sure. I think Casey, you might have that information.
And so everyone's aware the vision statement is posted in the question and answer. So if you go to that and you want to read through it, it should be posted there right under the question.
Also, I have a follow-up reading the comments. If you're voting by texting, text MAPC poll to that number first, and then you have to do the number. So that what seems to be the issue. So
Okay,
the next one, make sure you do that.
Yes. So this word cloud is just populating some of the terms that are coming up most. So obviously we're asking a couple different questions, and on the back end, it's going to capture everything that you say. But we are this kind of just shows some of the comments that, you know, the topic areas. So housing, transit, community, see traffic in there, parking. Maybe let's take another 30 seconds. Seeing infrastructure, transit is definitely popping out as the biggest one though, which I think aligns well with what with what our planning will be, you know, striving for. So I think Casey, if you want to deactivate that question, we can move on to the next. Okay, so our last poll in this section is asking folks which photos show architecture that you think would fit well in the South Acton Village District. So we have these 8 different photos, and you can select as many as you like. So I think Casey, if you want to start that poll. Okay, so Casey cannot see a total number of responses. Hopefully we can get that data on the back end. Right now we have about 57 people in the room. So I would say approximately 50 people are responding to the questions. But when we publish the presentation, we will show the results, and assuming we have those response numbers, we'll include them. All right, so we're seeing a pretty big breakdown. Some building styles we like a bit more than others. It looks like the first and second options are kind of coming out ahead right now. Those are in the first one's in West Acton, the second's in Concord, and then number 3 is Carlisle, and number 8 is Maynard. So makes sense for the context. I think let's just take another couple more seconds, and then we will move on to the next section of our presentation. All right. All right. I'm going to move on to the next section. And this is all about Section 3A. Before I get into it, I want to just do one more poll for right now, asking what your level of familiarity is with the new multifamily zoning requirement for MBTA communities. So before anything that you're learning today, how familiar would you say that you are with it? Okay, so right now we're seeing somewhat familiar. That makes a lot of sense. Also makes a lot of sense if you have not heard of it at all. All right. So almost half of folks are somewhat familiar. Almost a quarter or so are very familiar. And then, around 20% or so are not familiar at all. So hopefully you all feel a little bit more familiar and comfortable with it by the end of this meeting. And if there are any questions that we can't answer tonight, specifically about the law, we will ask our partners at the state, and we will, get back to everybody once we have answers. Okay. So just to go through some of the basics, this is a fairly recently passed law that says that all MBTA communities must have at least one zoning district that permits multifamily housing by right. And you can see in this map, these are all the communities that it applies to. The communities in the blue are rapid transit communities that have access to the subway. The green communities in the dark green are commuter rail, so that includes Acton. And then in the lighter greens are adjacent communities. And so they still have requirements, but they're slightly different because they don't actually have a station within the bounds of their town. The law mandates a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre. What gross density refers to is the entire land area divided by the number of units, as opposed to, subtracting away areas that you couldn't build on. That might get you the net density. So we're looking at the whole land parcel. Approximately, are we going to get roughly 15 units per acre? However, this can vary by sub-district. So you can have some areas where you might allow less than 15 units per acre, and you might have some where you would allow for more to make up to get that average. And as Kristen mentioned earlier, the key part of this is that a portion of the zoning district must be located within a half mile of the transit station. The district must also be a reasonable size, and we will get into some more details about what we mean. So reasonable size for Acton. Essentially, Acton has to have a multifamily zoning district that is at least 50 acres. That 50 acres is a number that is set by the state. Essentially, all the commuter rail and rapid transit communities have to have at least 50 acres. And the state also sets a certain number of acres that must be located within the half mile. And this number might vary by communities, and it really gets down to how much developable land is in that area. So if there's, for example, a lot of wetlands in the area, like there are in the South Acton area, then the state may allow for less acreage to be required within the half mile. So in Acton's case, 10 of those acres have to be located within the half mile. And then the remaining 40 acres can be outside this area. We're obviously trying to think closely about how whichever areas we're considering are all sort of connected to each other, and they form together a cohesive vision. And like I said, the district can be broken up into sub-districts, but at least half of the zoning district has to be contiguous, meaning that half of the zoning district is all next to each other, and then you could have some other pieces that are not part of that larger sub-district, but they all have to be at least 5 acres in size. So this graphic just basically shows what I just explained. So if you break down the number of acres that are within a half mile, you get approximately 502 acres. So that is the total area within a half mile radius of the South Acton station. Based on the features in Acton, the total developable area within the half mile radius is about half of that. It's 246 acres. And so then when we compare that with what we actually are required to allow, you can see that the requirement is actually much smaller than what that whole area is. So, only about, a much smaller area needs to allow for multifamily than is in the station area. Only about 10 acres, like I said, have to be within that half mile radius, and then 50 acres in total in Acton. Another requirement that the state set is a number called minimum unit capacity. But I want to be clear that minimum unit capacity, what this number is, does not require the construction of any units. And Section 3A is not a production mandate. Unlike 40B, which you may have heard of, that is essentially a production mandate, because it says that if you haven't reached an X number of units, then something can happen. In this requirement, you don't actually have to build anything. It is simply, if you look at what the zoning is in the area, what would be the maximum that you could build in that area based on what the zoning allows. And so the number for Acton that the state has set for the minimum unit capacity is 1,383 units. This is 15% of the total number of housing units, homes in Acton. It's not just a percentage of the total number of multifamily, it's a percentage that is all units. And these sort of, depending on the level of transit service, there's slightly different calculations for minimum unit capacity. And like I said, it measures the total number of units that could be built. And it's not how many units already exist. So for example, you might have a parcel that can allow, zoning will allow you to build 10 units. But say you have 4 units on that site right now. The unit capacity is still 10. So it's not measuring what already exists. It's not measuring what you're going to build. It's simply what the zoning could allow in a theoretical situation. A few other requirements that I'll mention is that the zoning district has to be feasible for development. Land that's not suitable, this includes wetlands, conservation land, roadways, is excluded from the 50-acre minimum district size. And the reason why the state requires this is because if they didn't, a municipality could theoretically zone 50 acres that's all wetlands, thinking that they might be able to get around the requirement. So doesn't work like that. So the areas theoretically need to have capacity for development. Zoning cannot contain any age restrictions. So you can't say we only want, senior housing. Zoning has to be suitable for families with children. And the way this is measured is basically that no community can set a number on bedroom limits for the unit, for the homes that are going to be, produced through the zoning. I want to reiterate something really key. The whole kind of crux of the community's guidelines, section 3A, is that it is slightly easier for development to happen as of right. The reason why that's important is because if a developer has to go through a special permit process or a variance, that can take a long time, and it also opens up uncertainty, which means that a project is less likely to happen. And so that's really why the state has set the requirement that part of the district allowed for multifamily by right, but site plan review is still required. So Acton can still, consider whatever it considers when it's going through site plan review for other projects, there's adequate infrastructure, that, everything has been sort of considered in the way that it needs to be considered. And also design standards are allowed. So you could set provisions in your zoning that specifically dictate how the built form is going to come out. So you can try to ensure that whatever is built is going to be most in context with your existing area. And also inclusionary zoning, that's also another word for affordable housing requirements, is allowed. The state allows it. You can require up to 10% of units to be deed restricted affordable to incomes at or below 80% area median income. And that is a number that's set for the whole greater Boston area, not just for Acton, though there is an option for more affordability if a financial feasibility analysis shows that there is a market for that. And the whole goal of the state in setting this law is really to encourage what we call missing middle housing. In Acton right now, we have a lot of detached single family houses in South Acton in particular. And then, there's also kind of the Avalon style developments that are more of a mid-rise. But we're also trying to think closely about all of the housing options that fall into the middle of that. And it shows you that, you can kind of have a fair amount of density, but in a way that, really still makes sense for the context of your community, whether that's through, townhouses, through triple deckers, etc. And this just shows a breakdown of the housing units by building type in Acton and also in the state. And basically what I just described, you can see that the majority of the homes are single family, and there really is that gap for the units that are 2 family or 5 to 9 units. There are some pretty serious results of non-compliance if Acton does not comply with the law. The Attorney General's office issued an advisory concerning enforcement of the MBTA Communities Law, which basically clarifies that communities can't just opt out of the law to just say we're going to forego the state funding, because failure to comply could result in civil enforcement action, and it also could leave Acton liable under federal and state fair housing laws, because the state is really seeing this new law as a way to kind of right the wrongs of past exclusionary zoning that has happened across the Commonwealth. And so that's sort of where they're coming from there. If Acton doesn't comply, they won't be eligible for some key funding sources that are really, that the town really relies on, like MassWorks, the Local Capital Projects Fund, and the Housing Choice Initiatives. And just in the past 3 years alone, Acton has received more than 3.5 million from these funding sources. And without, these grant sources, in order to make those upgrades that are really needed, that would otherwise have to come out of the residential property tax. And so that's another reason why continuing to get these grants is so important. And just quickly, some impacts that if Acton were to lose the local capital project funds that it's getting, the water district wouldn't be eligible for the SRF loan discount program. That has to do with the town's designation as a housing choice community. The Acton Housing Authority would lose 10% of state public housing funds, and the wastewater treatment plant would lose access to the 1.5% loan discount for WTV rehab project. And so these are all, again, key sources of funding that are doing really good things for Acton that we want to make sure that we are enabling to continue in the future. So I'm going to hand it back over to Kristen to talk a bit about how we are thinking that Acton may comply with Section 3A. And, this is really, we're starting from the beginning. So, we're eager to kind of share with you our thoughts and get your feedback.
Thank you, Emma. So we can move to the next slide. As we mentioned, this project has 2 parts and they're interrelated. So updating the South Acton Village Plan and looking at how Acton can comply with the new state regulations to allow for multifamily homes in its zoning at an average density of 15 units per acre. So we consolidated the community feedback we received through the survey, the in-person workshops. We reviewed previous goals adopted in the Acton 2020 Master Plan, Climate Action Plan, Housing Production Plan. And we worked with the advisory group to come up with a draft approach, which we are presenting and sharing with you tonight to obtain your feedback on. So this draft approach would create 2 different zoning districts, 2 different overlay districts. And I first wanted to make sure that, we kind of set a reminder about what zoning is. Zoning does not mandate that you do something to change something, right? It really is telling you what is allowed. And the zoning is also not saying that you have to demolish something that's there. It's basically saying this is an option that you could pursue. You don't have to demolish something that's there today to build something new. It's just an option and letting you know what the legal opportunities are for different uses. So this draft approach would create something called an overlay district. So 2 different overlay districts. And an overlay district provides additional options for development within a designated location that the town chooses, but retains the existing zoning underneath. So the draft approach would create 1 overlay district for a small area within the half-mile radius of the train station, where the town is required to zone to allow some multifamily homes, and another overlay district on 3 properties where they would be within about a mile radius of the train station and commercial center. And so Emma, you can, if you don't mind skipping to the next one. Thank you. So in a portion of the half-mile radius, the overlay district could allow small-scale multifamily homes. This location could allow for multifamily homes at a scale of less than 15 units per acre. So some examples of what that scale looks like in Acton today would be similar to the townhomes across the street from True Rest Brewery in West Acton, or the townhomes that were recently constructed across from the Discovery Museum. And then we can move to the next slide, thank you. On the 3 larger properties outside of the half-mile radius, the overlay district could allow multifamily homes at a larger scale, so more than that 15 units per acre. And so for this scale, you can think of like Avalon up in North Acton, This image on the right is a picture of phase 2 that's kind of tucked up in the back there. And then the picture on the right is an example of Powder Mill Apartments. That's the permitted 40B project down in the Powder Mill corridor. And I'm sorry, my screen just froze there for a minute. Can everyone still hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm gonna actually just switch here. So we can go to the next slide, Emma, if you don't mind. So the proposal came out, really by looking at and evaluating developable area remaining within the half-mile district. Most of the significant land area within the half-mile of the MBTA station has been purchased for, actually you can go back to the last one if you don't mind, the previous slide. Yeah, great, thank you. Most of the land area has been purchased for open space or agricultural preservation, is within the floodplain or wetlands or historic district. And the remaining land area is mostly small, shallow lots where more than 15 units per acre would require really tall buildings close to the street in order to comply with that requirement. So by creating 2 different districts, a small overlay district in that half-mile radius area and a large overlay district on those larger properties, the town could achieve compliance by allowing smaller scale, lower height multifamily homes within that half-mile radius and make up for that average 15 units per acre by allowing for a greater number of units per acre on those larger parcels that are set back from the road, where potential larger buildings are less visible from the street. So there's a little bit of a different contextual feel to that. And then within both overlay districts, we were proposing to the community to have an opportunity to require 10% inclusionary zoning. So that means that a minimum of 10% of the housing units that are constructed would be required to be deed restricted affordable units. So that means that 10% of them would be available only to people that make 80% of the area median income for the Boston area. So we can go to the next slide there, Emma. Thank you. So this is a map that shows the more southern part of the town. So think of south of Route 2. The dotted circle indicates the half-mile radius around the train station. So you can see the train station with the big letter T. We've got, I think is it Bessie, the dinosaur there, showing Discovery Museum, Acton gas station up there on the top, and some other indicators there for you. Central Street runs all the way up to West Acton, and we have Main Street that runs north to south. River Street is running along that pink line where the South Acton Village District is located, that zoning district. And then on the far bottom of the screen, you see a little shopping cart. That's where Stop and Shop is located. And that's what we call the Powder Mill corridor. So the proposed small multifamily overlay district is shown here in brown. And the proposed large scale multifamily district is shown in purple. Wanted to make sure to note that there are a lot of factors that we are looking at in addition to the community feedback. And a lot of that has to do with those, the goals of the town, as well as, the strategies that the town has listed to achieve those goals. So all of these locations are outside of the historic district, so not to conflict with any concerns there about redevelopment. They're also outside of the groundwater protection zone 1 and zone 2, which are the most highly regulated. And they're in keeping with the strategies of the climate action plan to locate more multifamily housing choices within a half-mile of public transit and near existing businesses and village districts like the Powder Mill corridor. You'll also notice that the proposed locations are outside of the South Acton Village zoning district. That's that area in pink. So based on the community feedback, commercial uses are strongly desired in the South Acton Village zoning district. The MBTA Communities Act, or that Section 3 new zoning law, requires that they set regulations that say you cannot require commercial uses. So you can't require mixed use, but you can allow for it. But you can't set regulations that say you have to have a certain amount of commercial in this area. So because of that factor, and knowing that the community has expressed a strong desire to encourage commercial uses like restaurants and coffee shops in the South Acton Village Zoning District, we're recommending that the Section 3A zoning compliance areas be located just outside of the core of the village in order to allow the town to explore some feasible options for requiring some commercial in that village core. So this approach is looking to also achieve a variety of different housing styles, which is another goal of the housing production plan. So again, the different townhome styles, which is a much different feel than the large scale complexes like in Avalon. And then I'm going to hand it back over to MAPC because we have want to take a moment and pause there to just get your feedback on this overall concept. So we're going to move to a poll to get a sense of, do you like this concept about allowing the small scale multifamily where we have to allow some within that half-mile district? So really scaling down that the density there in terms of like units per acre, but allowing more to offset that in a couple of larger sites. And then, your thoughts about requiring 10% inclusionary zoning.
And I'll just interject to say those having issues with the polls, we will send a short survey with the same questions via email to all those who registered. So we'll make sure to get your input on these specific questions.
Great, let's take another few more seconds. Okay.
And Emma, how many people have responded at this point?
So it doesn't seem to tell us that.
She can look. She can look after we deactivate the question.
Okay, great. Thank you. I apologize. I missed that before. Thank you.
Not used to using this technology, so thank you everyone for bearing with the kinks. But we see that a little less than half the people like this approach. Another 38% like it, but they have some concerns, and 15% do not like it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Kristen.
All right, so we're going to get into a little bit more of the details. So this map here is showing the proposed small scale multifamily overlay district and its location. So that location is shown there in brown. This is the area where we're proposing, where it could be less than 15 units per acre. Again, similar to the type of size that is across the street from Discovery Museum. And just to reference, so that you know where you're at, that tall house, that's Exchange Hall. I hope you can see Central Street kind of leading off of Main Street, and then crossing over the MBTA community rail line. And then you can see how Main Street leans up, right up at that, right where it meets Prospect Street. And that's kind of where this location is being proposed all the way up to that point. Currently, the area in brown is a residential zone that only allows for single family homes under Acton's current zoning bylaw. So the majority of uses on the ground today are a mix of different styles of single family homes, with the exception of 3 duplexes that are located along Central Street. These duplexes were constructed prior to the town's prohibition on duplexes in this district. There's a newer, smaller scale multifamily development that I mentioned across the street from Discovery Museum. But that development was constructed under the state law, Chapter 40B, which allows for a developer to override local zoning in order to achieve a level of affordability in the particular housing complex. And then the Discovery Museum, which is also located there on the right. And then we can move to the next slide. All right, thank you. So in this particular slide, we're showing a portion of that district a little bit darker. So if you see that outlined area in kind of that dark maroon, we're putting a proposal in front of you tonight to ask you what your thoughts are about allowing for mixed use. So again, we can't require it here if the town were to pursue the 3A compliance district, but you could allow for it. And this mixed use would mean having commercial on the ground floor and then residential on top, for example. So that's another part of the proposal that we're hoping to gain your feedback on tonight. So we're going to move into another poll asking you, do you like the idea of small scale multifamily housing along this particular location, Central Street and Main Street?
And for those curious, we're getting between 20 and 30 responses per question.
Thanks, Nora. All right, let's just take another few more seconds. Okay, Casey, if you want to deactivate. So just under 80% of folks like the idea of allowing for smaller scale multifamily along Central and Main Streets. About 18% don't know, and 4% do not like it.
All right, so yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sure. So this is just a follow-up question, specifically asking about the idea of allowing for mixed use if commercial is on the ground floor in the area shown on the map that is along Main Street. Okay. All right, let's take a few more seconds. Okay, so just under 70% of folks like the idea, just over 20% do not like the idea, and 11% are not sure. Thank you.
And then turning it back to you, I think, Emma, to talk a little bit about design, because I think, you know, as you explained, the state does allow for the community to adopt design standards. So the town can have a say in, you know, setting some requirements as long as they are predictable, because again, this has to be a by right method.
Exactly. So obviously, like any zoning generally would, we can specify what uses we would want to allow. So whether that is townhouse, multifamily, duplex, also dimensional requirements that can kind of inform what housing type you might get. But then, as Kristen mentioned, we can also get into even more detail around roof lines, dormers. So we're going to ask you a whole host of questions about that. So first, we want to just get your opinion on some of these photos about what you think would fit well for small scale multifamily. And so we're talking about those areas along Central Street and Main Street. Okay, so you can select as many as you like. All right, let's just take a few more questions, a few more seconds. So the ones definitely coming out ahead are the triplex, the first option. We have also interest in the small mixed use typology, that's number 6. And then also number 5, that is the townhouse style, like a brick townhouse style. Okay. So now, like I mentioned, we're just going to ask some more specific questions about different features. So I'm going to ask you for these questions. Don't just vote about how you feel about the whole building. We're specifically asking about, for this question, the roof line. So you might not, like another part of the building, but you really like the roof line. So try to select that. And you can select as many as you like. So, we have some different options here, a flat roof, gable roof. And so you can weigh in on these on the next. We're definitely seeing the most support for the more gable style roofs, which sort of fit in the, more colonial Victorian context. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Do you prefer homes with or without dormers? And the dormers are referring to, we're not aware, the little windows that are sticking out up through the roof. Those are dormers. So do you prefer homes with or without them? Or if you like them both, you can select that. Right. Just a few more seconds. We're seeing almost 2/3 of folks like them both. That's great. And some folks prefer one or the other, but it seems like most folks could be happy with either. Which types of entryways do you prefer? So we have a couple options here. The first is kind of a small entry porch that doesn't really have much room for seating, but it gives you a little coverage when you're entering your unit. 2 is broken down into individual porches. Number 3 shows kind of a patio front area. And then number 4 is a shared front porch, which might be shared between 1 or 2 units. So weigh in on that. Porches are lovely, so not surprising that there's a lot of enthusiasm for both the shared and not shared porches. Slightly less than that enthusiasm for the patio out front. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Oh, I'm going to hand it back to Kristen to talk about the larger scale 3A area.
Great, thanks, Emma. So really interesting to see your responses. Thank you for that. And I just wanted to say a quick reminder, because a question came up and it's actually one that we get often. Just a reminder that zoning is about providing options. There's no mandate to construct, and there's no requirement to demolish what already exists on a site in order to construct something new. Rather, zoning dictates what's allowed today, tomorrow, or in the future. So just to kind of set that framework again. So with this draft approach, we talked about the 2 overlay districts, one being the small scale. We just got feedback from you on that and the specifics. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the large scale. So, in this particular picture that you're seeing here, it's kind of just an overview picture showing a little bit of context of where those properties are. So we've got, again, the train station in the middle. That dotted circle is the half-mile radius. Down on the bottom, you see the shopping cart where Stop and Shop is located. Up on the far top left, that is a property, off of Central Street. And then we have that property, that purple one, which is at the end of River Street where it meets Parker Street. And the properties that are shown there are within a mile of the train station or with, in Powder Mill, the commercial center there. So we can move to the next slide, Emma. Thank you. So this parcel is currently a multi-family housing development called Dover Heights. So you might be familiar with that if you're driving on Central Street just before or after you go over the train tracks. This particular location and these homes are what we call pre-existing non-conforming. So multifamily at this scale was allowed in Acton at one time, but then the town changed the zoning to prohibit it. So today it's zoned for single family. There is something called an affordable housing overlay district option that the town adopted several years ago, but it has not been financially feasible to use, so it hasn't been implemented. And in this particular location, that affordable housing overlay district actually would not allow for this development that exists today because the number of homes that are presently on the site would still be too much. But there is a significant amount of additional developable land area that could accommodate more homes for people. The site is set back from the street and it is located just over a half mile from both West Acton Village and South Acton Village. So in line with a lot of the community's plans about sustainable development and where to locate that. Then we can go to the next slide, Emma. Thank you. This next slide is showing a location that, again, is right off of Parker Street at the end of River Street. This group of properties consists of one that is the home to the Parker Street apartments. So we're talking about like 88, 68 Parker Street and the parcels behind. The property that has the current apartments on it today was again built at a time where Acton allowed for multifamily homes and then decided to change their zoning to prohibit it. So we call that pre-existing non-conforming. And it is legal pre-existing non-conforming. It can continue, but it could not be redeveloped if it were demolished. Today, it's zoned for single family homes. So that's what's allowed on that particular property. The group of properties right directly below that are undeveloped, and it's just north of the MBTA train station. So that's the line that you see going right underneath the property. And this is currently zoned to TD, or for the technology district, which is an industrial district. The owner of this property has approached the town about a potential 40B housing concept, like a conceptual idea of doing a 40B project there, but has not submitted any formal plans or formal proposals at this time. The site is located just under a mile from the MBTA station. and is down the street from the future 53 River Street, or the future park at 53 River Street. And then we can go to the next slide if you don't mind. This is the last of the large properties that we're asking you about tonight. This group of properties is located off Powder Mill Road and is the site of the permitted 40B multifamily housing development that got their permits from the Zoning Board of Appeals a few years ago now. The development has not started construction yet, but it has been approved. And we do expect construction to start sometime this year from what we're hearing. It is located less than a half a mile from the commercial shopping plaza that has the Stop and Shop there. And it is along the Powder Mill corridor. So some of you may have attended or been involved in the Connect Powder Mill project. It's another area plan project that the town is working on, this one with Maynard. It's a collaborative rezoning effort to create consistent zoning on Powder Mill throughout both towns to support walkable mixed-use developments, improve transportation options for all, and expand access to the Assabet River, which is a great asset right nearby. And while the site is located more than a mile away from the train station, again, it is very close to existing commercial areas, and it's proposed in this particular location for rezoning the entire Powder Mill corridor into Maynard as well, to really create a walkable mixed-use corridor that would really increase benefits for all of the people that are there today and future residents of this particular development.
All right.
Move into the next poll to see your feedback.
All right, so we're almost at the end. We have two more. Thank you again for your patience and your participation. So this question is asking if these three locations make sense for larger scale multifamily housing complexes. Okay, so 80% of folks feel like they make sense, 12% thinks they do not make sense, and 8% do not know. Okay, and here's our last poll question. This should say poll 13 and not 10, but we just are asking for your feedback on some of the buildings that we're presenting to you here. Which photos show housing that you think might fit well for larger scale multifamily? And you can select as many as you would like. So we're definitely seeing the most interest in that Avalon in North Acton. Not surprising. It's got kind of the features that make it a little more looking and with the separate entrances. Okay, yeah, so about a third of folks, that's their favorite, and then kind of a mix between those other options. Okay. I'm actually gonna hold this until after the Q&A. Actually, no, I'll just go through it now. Just so you are all aware, the same information that has been covered at tonight's webinar is going to be displayed on boards next week at both Town Hall and the Acton Memorial Library. So if you had kind of trouble putting in your responses, or you just want a little bit more time to stand in front of the boards and look at them, we encourage you to stop by. They will be up during the full operational hours next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So hopefully you can check that out, or if there's any folks you know who weren't able to make it tonight but really wanted to participate, you should direct them to come to that. And for our next steps, we still have a lot more to do. And so the very first thing is going to be to analyze our feedback from this webinar and from the in-person engagement that we're going to offer next week. From there, we're going to start making up some recommendations for zoning design and infrastructure. And we're also going to create 3D visualizations that can show the type of new development that zoning that we might recommend would allow. And this is all going to be presented to the community, likely in September, where we will get feedback on recommendations. And just so you are all aware that the deadline for Acton to comply with Section 3A, which basically means adopting a zoning amendment, is by December 31st, 2024. So the town is aiming for Springtown meeting 2024 for a vote on that, which will give a little bit of cushion for when Acton would have to submit its compliance application. Okay, so let's get into the Q&A. We have about we have at least 15 minutes, and we might, if folks want to stick around a little bit longer, we can probably do that. And then if not, if there's any other questions we're not going to get to, we will make all of those questions and our answers available offline. I'm going to just stop sharing my screen, so it's a little easier to see folks. Okay, so Andrea is going to help facilitate the Q&A. So Andrea, if you want to just, I'm not sure if you want to go based on who sent things in first, or.
Yeah, so thank you all for being really participatory. We've gotten lots of great questions and we've been trying to add answers. So some of them are already answered in the box, but one of the early questions that we had was what kinds of use regulations beyond different housing types might you be considering? One was curious about lithium battery energy, but maybe you can generally about what other use regulations may change through the zoning process or housing.
I can take that one, Andrea. I think, that type of use we would classify as warehouse, so it would not be allowed in a residential district, or it's not currently allowed in the village district. And I don't think, based on the feedback that we've been receiving from the community, that would be a type of use that would be compatible with that feedback. That would be a good one for us to expand upon in a written response that we can definitely post.
Okay. I think Andrea might be frozen. Andrea, I'm not sure if you can hear us. Casey, do you want to just?
Awesome, thanks.
We still can't see you, so you're still stuck in your position from about 30 seconds ago. So I think let's wait to see if you come back. Maybe Casey, you want to take the next question, and we can see if reception gets better.
Can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you, but it's a little, there's a little delay.
Me?
You could try turning off your video. Sometimes that tends to
see. I'll try, but maybe Casey can take over. Yeah, is this better? Less choppy? Maybe not.
I think so. Yeah, you want to try?
I think I can take
Yeah, I
over in
think
the
Casey.
interim. I'm seeing a question about, is it all or none for large developments, all 3 apartment complexes to be built, or 1 or 2? So I think somebody wants to jump in there again. I know it's something we've talked about a lot, but I think continuing to reiterate it never hurts.
Yeah, I'm taking that one, Emma. I think it gets back to, the fact that this is allowing for options. So, part of this approach is looking at ways that we can make the scale and the size of buildings and the number of dwelling units in that core half-mile radius smaller, because the parcels are not very deep. They're not large, they're not deep, they're small. There's not a lot of land area to work with there. And so we're trying to come up with ways where we can offset the scale there by allowing for more housing units per acre on larger sites. So it doesn't mean that all 3 of those have to be developed tomorrow. It just means that the town could achieve compliance by allowing for those uses on those sites. And maybe they're developed in 5 years, maybe 50 years. It really depends on market conditions, and it would be up to the private property owner if they even wanted to do something and if it was feasible for them financially.
I think another question somewhat related is asking about the specific siting of some of the proposed districts. Why would we not allow more multifamily closer to the train station? If you maybe want to talk a little bit about your reasoning for how some of those sites were selected.
That is a really great question. The sites were really selected, based off of the community feedback that we got. And, one of the constraints that we're also dealing with is the significant amount of wetlands and flood zone that is located right around the train station. Acton also has a much more rigorous wetlands protection bylaw beyond what the state requirements are. So Acton has a 75-foot no build, meaning at the point of the edge of wetlands, you cannot disturb anything within 50 feet, and then within 75 feet, you can't build anything. So when you start to add those buffers along with the floodplain overlay district, as well as all of the land that the town purchased for open space preservation and agricultural preservation, you're not left with a whole lot that's close to the train station. And all of those things are really valuable and really important. There's a lot of conflicting, valuable, important things that have to be considered when we're planning and looking at zoning changes. So there were concerns that we heard from the community about having this type of multifamily housing by right in the historic district. There were some concerns expressed about what would that do, and so we basically took that community feedback and put it back out to you today, and we'll again in our in-person workshops to see what you think about that. But the historic district is very close to the train station as well. So there's a lot of competing interests and values of the town. And so this was really a proposal that tried to balance all of that.
And I think also just not wanting to limit us with not being able to require mixed use, because
Yes.
just really wanted to prioritize allowing for the commercial uses in the South Acton Village District. So that was one of the primary reasons also why we kept it out.
Thank you, Emma. And that portion there, if you're thinking about Railroad Street, like just north of Railroad Street, closer to Central Street, that area there is really like a key area that is kind of the most lively commercial area that we have that could potentially see some type of, maybe a restaurant, maybe a cafe or something more in the future, depending on how the community moves forward with future zoning.
I just want to touch on a point that Kristen made as well, because I see it coming up on the chat. But none of this zoning would supersede any of the town's current wetland regulations. So any parcel that has wetlands and couldn't be developed currently on those wetland sites could continue to not be developed on those wetland sites.
Great, thank you so much for seeing that question, Nora, because the zoning bylaw is its own document. The Wetlands Protection Act is its own document. The
Historic district is
Sewer
its
district,
own.
the Board of Health, they're following regulations. So they're all separate and everybody has to comply with everything. And same with the historic district as well. They have requirements as well. So, zoning does not supersede, the local zoning does not supersede those independent laws. Great question. I'm glad you picked up on that. Thank you, Nora.
I've seen a couple other questions here asking about potential opportunities for including solar in new multifamily or new project developments. Is that something that's been thought about relative to the zoning?
So I'll take that again, just because I don't think there's any proposal here to change Acton's zoning for solar. Acton allows, I'll give a little plug if anyone trying sustainability plug. Acton allows for roof solar as an accessory use by right. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, right now, the way that the zoning is constructed, you can do that. We haven't heard any feedback through this process that would, point to changing that.
And also just to flag that there is a requirement that we can't set stricter like LEED or solar, those kind of requirements in this district versus the rest of Acton. But again, if it's required all in Acton, that's okay. And we also could, if we wanted to, bake incentives into our zoning to encourage or incentivize developers to include solar and other kinds of, clean energy. So that's something we can, we'll definitely be thinking about as we get into the recommendation stage.
Seeing a question here. Thanks, presenters, for providing the overview. Would the MBTA consider licensing space in its parking lots to food trucks or other temporary food and beverage installations to bring more economic activity to the historic area transit district in the near term?
That's a good question. So the town actually does have a food truck down there. I think it was like Muddy Waters, I think. So they do, they are down there sometimes. I can't remember the day, but we can try to find out and post it somewhere for you. The town owns the MBTA lot on the north side of Maple Street. And then the town also owns, on the north side of the tracks. On the south side of the tracks off of Maple Street, the town owns that lot too. We used to call it the Gordon Richards property because that's who previously owned it. And then the MBTA owns the lot that's closer to the bridge. So the town has been doing, a little food truck thing, but great idea. Maybe we can do more of it if that's something the community wants to pursue.
Seeing another question about, is there a timeline for the implementation of other aspirations that were talked about earlier in the presentation, like improved pedestrian access? Emma, if you want to touch on some of those timeline details again.
So we'll be making recommendations for all those kind of things in this plan. Obviously, some of those things are just recommendations. We, in terms of implementation of those things, it's obviously dependent on funding and, other priorities that the town sets, but we will be considering those things because obviously if we're recommending any increased density, traffic, people, we want to be thinking really carefully about how we accommodate any of that.
Yeah, and I think we're very lucky because we have a great DPW department who I think is working on several different areas in town, trying to improve the streets, make complete streets, so street for everyone, sidewalks, bike lanes, and people driving in their car. And the DPW director has actually been keeping in touch and watching and tracking this process because the feedback that we're collecting, kind of more like the anecdotal feedback from the community members about where they're going. We ask people to kind of track where they walk, where they bike, where they drive, and the feedback that we've been receiving about where people feel unsafe. we've been providing that to the DPW director, and he's actually going to be working on a traffic study for South Acton, starting the end of the summer, early fall. So that is coming down the line, you know, it's focused on complete streets, which is a lot of what we've been hearing about: sidewalks, safe connections, and so forth.
And as we talked about earlier, in terms of the compliance, being able to access those grant funds like MassWorks that are a crucial piece of funding any of those upgrades, you know, will be contingent on Acton complying with this law. So, you know, the state is winding these things very close together because they know, you know, that there is a strong link between development and infrastructure.
Just want to interject with a quick update on how many participants. We currently have 50, for those wondering.
Did also just want to flag, Emma, that we are running up on 8:30. I want to be respectful of folks' time. So if we want to take maybe one or two more questions or just take care of it in response, I'll let the rest of my panelists make a decision about that.
I mean, there's a lot. So maybe let's just try to do like two more, but then we will keep track of all of these and we will send out an email to the listserv, post it all on the website. And if you've registered for this meeting, you're automatically going to be added to our listserv and you will be notified about all of this. So apologies in advance if we don't get to your questions, but we will do our best to answer them.
Do you mind if I grab two questions quickly?
Go for it.
Please.
Looking through, and I think there's some like kind of hot topics or things that people have asked a lot, just kind of in passing. One is about explaining what the process for Section 3 building applications would be, and does the town and residents really have a say? So Emma kind of talked a little bit about like what the town can do, right? So we can have site plan review. It just can't be a site plan special permit. So in Acton, all we have right now is site plan special permit. And what a special permit tag means, it's not by right, it's discretionary. So the town could just say no because they don't feel like it is in context with the neighborhood, which is a subjective finding. By right is something that is predictable in permitting. So the town could set design regulations that say, we want to have, you know, gabled roofs at a certain distance, and we want to have, you know, a building setback a little bit. And we want it to be, or we want it to be closer to the street. So we can set those types of regulations in the zoning, as long as then when somebody reads it, they know exactly what they're supposed to do. And it's not a discretionary type of thing. But we can have site plan review. We can require there be a public notification process for that, but it just can't be a special permit. But there would be, you know, there could be a process that the town sets forth so that the public can have input into the development process. But again, it's a predictable permitting process where if you comply, you are entitled to approval. Right. So that's kind of the difference there.
But if someone were to propose something totally egregious and, you know, it would not meet the site plan review criteria, like that is a reason to deny a project. So
exactly.
It doesn't mean every project is going to be able to come through. It still has to meet all of those findings.
Right, exactly. The other question that I saw was asking about Kelly's Corner and also potential development over the train station. So we had a lot of sticky dots on Kelly's Corner, but what we also heard was that the community really wanted mixed use in Kelly's Corner. We had a several year-long zoning and planning process for the Kelly's Corner area called the Kelly's Corner Improvement Initiative. And that really directed the town to make it into a mixed-use walkable town center. With the requirements that the state has set forth, they are not allowing communities to mandate mixed use. So the fear there could be that if it were zoned 3A for 3A compliance, it could all turn to residential. Which, you know, is just in conflict with the kind of the goals and the strategies to achieve those goals that the town had set forth previously. The other idea of allowing for it over the train station, the MBTA commuter lot is town owned, and that was a great question, and we did look into that with Emma. Because the town does not currently have a proposal for putting it out to bid for a development project there, it would not count towards the compliance in terms of calculating those metrics that the state wants us to have, but we can put it in the overlay district. And in the future, if the town wants to pursue that, the zoning would already be in place, so the town could act on it. So if the town wanted to have, podium type parking, so parking underneath on a ground floor and then building up on top of the train station, if the town were to adopt the proposal that we showed you tonight, it would be able to do that. But as it stands today, if it were going to the state for compliance, that land area cannot be counted towards compliance metrics.
All right, well, I think we unfortunately do need to shut it down just so we can let people have the rest of their nights back. But any last questions you might have, please get them in the Q&A right now so we can make sure we answer them. And I'm just going to share some links for you all if you are interested in. Why is my computer? Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go.
And while you're doing that, Emma, I'm just going to put the plug in again for people to please stop by town hall or the library next week if you feel like you haven't gotten enough tonight and you feel like you need to kind of digest more. We'll have some boards out with some of this information, and then we're going to try to staff it as much as we can throughout the day. Well, we have those out there, but we're hoping to kind of leave them there too for people to just read as they're passing through. And as always, we're at town hall on the ground floor, and we love to talk to the Acton residents and hear about what their thoughts are. So come on down.
Thanks so much. And we will again follow up with you all after this meeting with a recording and with the presentation and with the FAQ and anything else that we're going to share. So thank you all so much again for joining us.